Thank you all for coming. I know in the midst of a busy legislative schedule and announcements and activities in the Senate, there may be more important matters on the minds of many Americans, but freedom is always the most important issue for the American people, and the preservation of freedom is the most important issue in Washington, D.C. Today, in partnership with my colleagues, we will continue an effort by House Republicans to ensure that the American people and the American people alone will decide what opinions and voices are heard on the broadcast airwaves of this country. The Walden-Pence amendment, which I'm very pleased to join in partnership with my colleague from Oregon, Greg Walden. The Walden-Pence amendment is an evolution of an amendment that Mr. Walden, Mr. Hensarling, and Mr. Flake and I first brought 2 years ago in the Financial Services Appropriations Bill. It may come as a surprise to many, but the Financial Services Appropriations Bill is where the Federal Communications Commission obtains its budget. And it would be almost 2 years ago this month that myself, Mr. Walden, and these colleagues brought an amendment to the floor of the House of Representatives that specifically banned the use of any dollars by the Federal Communications Commission to restore the so-called fairness doctrine to the law of the land. Our reason for doing so was important then, and it has remained important today, and that is that some of the most powerful voices in the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. have openly advocated a return of censorship to the airwaves of America by imposing either the fairness doctrine or some new version of it under the rubric of regulations concerning localism. We truly believe that when President Reagan ended the fairness doctrine in 1987, that the great beneficiaries of that were the American people who have seen, I think when the fairness doctrine was repealed, there were a few hundred radio stations in America that even tried to do a talk format. Now there are thousands of radio stations in that format today. And while the stereotype is that the most prominent voices in talk radio today are conservative voices, a proper understanding of radio at every level, local and regional, statewide and national, attests that there are a wide variety of voices being heard. Conservatives and liberals, progressives and independents all find their way to the airwaves of this country because of the freedom that we've enjoyed since the demise of the fairness doctrine. Nevertheless, in the years that have ensued since our effort to bring the Pence-Walden amendment to the floor 2 years ago, an amendment that received 305 votes on the floor of the House of Representatives, including over 100 Democrats. We've heard voices like Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's openly advocated a return of the fairness doctrine, leading members of the Senate, including Senator Dianna Feinstein, Senator Dick Durbin, continue to advocate for a return of the fairness doctrine. And so we believe that the time is now for Congress to drive a stake through the heart of this Depression-era form of censorship and deny all federal funding to the FCC for the purpose of restoring the fairness doctrine or any new version of it that would come under the rubric of localism. I truly believe with all of my heart that the cause of the American people is freedom. And in this cause, we must ever be vigilant. And today I'm honored to be joined by my colleagues, including the lead sponsor of this amendment, to call on the Rules Committee, call on our Democrat colleagues to join with us, say no to censorship, say yes to freedom, and pass the Walden-Pence amendment.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Greg Walden, and I appreciate you all being here. In a way of background, for over 21 years, my wife and I owned and operated radio stations, and I grew up in a family whose involvement in the radio business in small markets in Oregon dates back to the 1930s. And so I'm acutely familiar with the fairness doctrine when it was in place and when it's been gone. and the importance of standing up for freedom and First Amendment rights of the airwaves. And Mike and I have worked together, too, on standing up for reporters' rights and a national shield law. I actually have a journalism degree, and so I believe very fervently in keeping the government out of political speech and away from religious speech, both of which could be affected if the rules that were put forth under the prior administration for consideration through the FCC were to somehow find their way through a back door into either rules or law. Now, some may argue that with 305 members voting with us back in 2007, why is this even an issue? Why is it an issue today? There are other people who have come out and said, oh, we're not going to do that. I think you always have to be vigilant and proactive in standing up for free speech rights. Silence sometimes is observed as acquiescence. And I think only because Mike and I did what we did on the Fairness Doctrine a couple of years ago did we get to the point where they backed off. But then you began to hear talk about coming at it through localism. Localism meaning that you do community ascertainment surveys like were done in the 70s and repealed later. That you would appoint some sort of community advisory boards that could then dictate to stations what they think should be covered. As a result of that, you could put in peril their licenses. I don't want ACORN or other groups, right or left, in a position to have that kind of authority and effect when it comes to license renewal. And that's where the amendment that we've asked the Rules Committee to consider, which they'll take up today, and allow us to offer on the House floor, does a comprehensive approach to prevent the Fairness Doctrine from coming back and to, as Mike said, stop this whole notion of a backdoor Fairness Doctrine under the rubric of localism. I think it's very important to do. I think it's something we have to keep fighting on. And I appreciate the support of my colleagues. And frankly, if everybody's saying it's not going to happen, then offering the amendment shouldn't be a big deal. They ought to give us that chance, and maybe they'll adopt it by voice vote. We'll find out this afternoon whether free speech rights exist in the House of Representatives and the Rules Committee or not, whether or not they allow us to have the amendment at all. So I appreciate you all being here today. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Hensarling from Texas to make some comments, and then we'll hear from Jeff Flake.
Thank you, Greg, and let me thank Mike and Greg for their leadership, along with my colleague Jeff Flake from Arizona. There are too many liberal Democrats in this town who want to control your access to health care. They want to control what kind of cars you're able to drive. They want to control whether or not you even receive a credit card, and some want to control what you hear over the radio. The use of the term Fairness Doctrine to cloak censorship would make George Orwell blush, and yet it is a phenomenon we see today. Now, as my colleague Greg said, 2 years ago we had 305 members of the House vote in favor of the First Amendment. Unfortunately, I do not believe Speaker Nancy Pelosi was one of them. And Nancy Pelosi has a way of getting her way around this place, just as members of the Blue Dog Coalition. So the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, thus our presence here today. I can think of no greater threat to freedom of speech, and thus freedom, than the use of the so-called Fairness Doctrine. And whatever plausible intellectual foundation it might have had, and I will never admit that it had one, but to the extent it had one, it harkens back to a different era where each of us had perhaps one, maybe two black and white television stations coming across our television, maybe 2 or 3 AM radio stations you could get on your car. Now, at least in Dallas, my wife and I are treated to about 130 different television stations, of which we watch about 2 or 3. I've got satellite radio, the access to satellite radio throughout the nation. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of blogs and news sites set up on the web. Any American can go to their public library and start their own news site. So again, whatever plausible intellectual rationale it might have had, and I don't admit to one, it certainly doesn't have one today. Of all the freedoms we hold most sacred, our First Amendment freedom of speech is at the top, and we need to do everything that we can protect it. So I certainly applaud my colleagues for their leadership and happy to add my voice in this space.
We just concur with what's been said. That also note that you'll hear from the other side. There's no reason for this. We don't need to make this in order because the president has indicated that he's not in support of it. But let me tell you, if you go on the floor and watch particularly this appropriation cycle that we're going through, we're doing a lot of things we said we'd never do. And so it pays to be vigilant here. This is a good piece of legislation. I applaud Mike and Greg and Jeb for getting behind it, and we need it because we're doing things we said we'd never do, and this is something that we should never ever do.